Hello, everyone. Hope you're happy, healthy, and doing great. For a while, I've been so eager to share more and more of my journey of learning and acquiring the skill set needed to build better digital product and solve bigger and better problems. And a big part of that journey was actually going out there and looking for interesting perspectives and value content that helped me a lot shape up a lot of my personal knowledge as well as my opinions and perspectives to user experience as a business and also to problem solving. And not only for me as a product designer, but also I think it could be of value to anyone in my region, specifically as in North Africa or Africa in general, but also Tunisia, considering that markets here and problems here are, let's say, a bit immature, and the scale of the problems that we're dealing with as user experience designers or as problem solvers in general are less impactful than they are in other regions, sadly. But speaking of high value and speaking of content of value, today I have a really special guest and someone who I've been following closely on social media, someone who's been dishing out really, really amazing content, really inspiring and insightful information over his channels on Instagram, on Facebook, and on YouTube. I'm really humbled. I'm really, really pleased to have as my guest today Mr. Richard Young, product design lead at Facebook. Richard, how are you doing?
Good, good. How are you? Thanks for having
The
me.
pleasure is all mine. One of the main things that I want to discuss with you today, and also something that we actually exchanged a bit about on social media, was having more value as a designer within markets that aren't really giving you that margin to have that value, to have that impact. So that would be like one of the main axes that we're gonna talk about. But right before we go through that, I think me personally and also everyone watching will be really pleased to know more about you as a person and how you get into the user experience design business, and also how did you end up working at Facebook. I think it would be a really interesting short story to hear from you.
Sure, yeah, happy to kind of go into it. So I went to university in pre-med. My parents kind of pressured me to become a doctor. It's very common in my
Yeah.
culture. Unfortunately, I did okay in school, but I wasn't really passionate about what I was learning. I felt like I wanted, more of a career where I had more creative problem solving, more impact, and a place to kind of exercise my creativity. So my last year at university, I decided to make the jump from pre-med to design. And luckily, I went to the University of Waterloo, which is a very tech forward or tech heavy
Hmm.
school. So I had some more exposure. And I essentially started by self teaching everything online. Basically, learned the entirety of my design knowledge from reading books and articles, online courses, and a lot of practice. Um, I was lucky to get my first job at PlayStation, where I originally interned doing like visual design, A/B testing, growth experiments. Eventually, I was offered a full time contractor position in which I worked full time in my last year of school, and then just
Nice.
kind of dropped all my classes and did it online. Afterwards, or during this period, I was very involved in freelancing and startups. I was like very new to design, so I wanted to get as much experience and exposure as possible. So by the time I graduated, I had a fair amount of experience under my belt, and I was able to land a job at Shopify doing growth design as well, which eventually transitioned into more of a design role within a kind of like a startup project within Shopify, which I kind of like led a new project from scratch to launch, eventually reaching some mild success. And then afterwards, I did some agency work. I bounced around through different startups. It was kind of like just a mishmash of like different experiences. Eventually, Facebook reached out to me after finding one of my portfolios online, and then I interviewed and got into Facebook last
Jeez.
year in November. And then I initially started off in ads because I wanted to learn more about the kind of paid growth side. Because at that time, I realized my niche was in 0 to 100 consumer startups and growth. And I felt like I understood the organic side, like SEO and SEO, direct traffic, all that stuff, word of mouth. But I didn't really understand the paid side as much, so I focused on that opportunity. But after a year, I decided I wanted to go back to my roots and do more kind of startup and incubator work. So I transitioned into Facebook MPE, which stands for New Product Experimentation, and it's kind of like Facebook's internal incubator. Yeah, but happy to elaborate if you have any questions or anything you want to learn more about in detail.
I think you already went through it like really, really intuitively. So yeah, I appreciate the insight. However, you mentioned something really interesting, which is being self-taught. And I personally would love to know more. How did you, especially knowing the caliber of the companies that you worked with and the interviews that you went through, how did you present the concept or the fact that you are a self-taught designer versus maybe other candidates that maybe had more, let's say, academic qualifications or more yeah, theoretical backgrounds? How did you present it in a way that it seemed more like an advantage to you or something positive that you have versus these other candidates that they could be more, let's say, theoretical or more backed by certifications and academic qualifications?
That's a good question. So I think the beauty of design is that it's so multidisciplinary and it's spread off across many different fields, right?
Yes,
Depending on the type of work you're doing, a senior designer at one company might be more junior at another company,
very true.
and vice
Very true.
versa. So especially like for me, like I came from a non-design background, a non-tech background. It's a weakness as much as it is a strength. In fact, this is just opinion, but I actually think that designers who don't come from a design background are better designers, like in the long term, because they bring that like diverse perspective. I kind of mentioned how like design is very
Yeah.
multidisciplinary. There's a lot of things that you know how to do or have context on in your past experiences, whether it be a job or education, that actually have a lot of parallels with design and industry once you figure out what the key term, what the subdiscipline actually is. So I'll give you some examples. So let's say your background's in, front end development or computer science or software engineering. There's a subset of design called performance design, which has to do with page loading and the speed and performance of your app or website. That a designer who came from a design school would have a very hard time learning and picking up because you need to know a lot about
Yeah.
servers and rendering, CSS, etc. So if you were like a CS student and then you got into design, you can draw that parallel and be like, all right, like I have this background and I learned performance design and this is how I can help your
Yeah.
business. And for me, my background was in science, so I had a pretty good understanding of data and research, the ability to synthesize a lot of complex concepts, and just how to conduct research. And I realized I had an edge on the user research side. So I figured out how to apply a lot of those transferable skills. I picked up the user research aspect of design really, really quickly compared to somebody without that science background. Another common vector I see is people who have a psychology, sociology, poli-sci, or English lit background. They become exceptionally good, and it's very easy for them to pick up how to, content write, copyright, how to do, all sorts of the content design aspects of design. So I think literally in any field that you come from, if you can figure out how to leverage your background and tie in something or find out the design industry equivalent for things that are very close to what you can use that as leverage or use that as an edge to stand out as a new designer. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
perfectly, perfectly. In fact, right in the same context, was there any point where you thought that maybe a more theoretical knowledge in a certain field could have gave you an edge? Even though you kind of answered it that there is always the discipline that you can excel at, but let's assume, or according to your parkour, did you have maybe been in a situation where you felt like if you picked something or if you had a knowledge in a specific field, you could have had a really bigger edge, either functionally or maybe applying or and being in a certain environment, whether as a candidate or as an employee. Did that scenario ever happen to you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And this is, again, personal
Yeah.
opinion, but I personally feel like no, because a lot of what they teach you in school, it's either outdated or like too theoretical. Like design is a very practical kind of job where you need to be able to apply things. And the best way to apply is actually practice and practice and practice. And a lot of it's like learning things contextually on the spot as the problems come
Mm-hmm.
up. So it's more important for you to be adaptable and for you to be able to learn quickly than it is for you to store a lot of theoretical knowledge in your head. And that's how I've always done things, right? Like I've never actually finished a course or even read a full design book cover to
Same.
cover. I basically exactly, and you shouldn't feel
Yeah.
bad about that
Mm-hmm.
because that's not how people learn. That's not how people do things in real life. You need to be able to like quickly understand what you don't know, how to quickly extract that information from a variety of sources, and then like play around and like experiment and apply that to your designs. And that's what's going to actually make you a good designer, not like any theoretical knowledge that you might have from education.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, I could even apply what you said to my personal approach to going through the my journey or my 5 years right now of experience. I think the most learning I got, or the highest my learning curve got, was when I was challenged technically, or I was practicing technically what I wanted to achieve and wasn't actually trying to find theoretically how I can do it. I don't know if that made sense. So I was looking for, let's say, I'm trying to balance out a certain layout, or try to yeah, specifically that scenario. I usually try to refine how would someone who has better expertise than me would even that out, and what's his thought process in dealing with a specific layout, let's say, rather than just go and try to theoretically find, let's say, the ABCs of creating a balanced layout. Well, eventually that kind of came up with it, like as a solidification of what I already know. I had to know the background of everything, but the first steps I did were like 90% practical, and yeah, and the 10% theoretical was always like a solidification. I need to confirm that what I'm doing is based on the norms, or is it is correct. So it was always that validation, but the first step was always like a free fall on whatever it is that is available, and try to extract the information. So I really appreciate that this perspective, and I know there's a lot of designers who share it. Sorry to cut you off. Yeah, continue.
Oh, I was gonna add one more
Mm-hmm.
point is that the whole process of learning design, it should be fun for you. Like it's so broad that you'll find something that you're interested in. There's actually a lot of aspects of design that I personally, right now at this point,
Mm-hmm.
find really boring. But in the future, more interesting. And like having a project to actually apply your learnings to is kind of the key. And that's how I learned, right? Like nowadays, there's people that go through boot camps. They force themselves to read books and go through courses from like start to
Yeah.
finish, 100%. I don't think that's like the best way to learn. I feel like you should find a project or a website or app that you want to design, that you're passionate about, and then anytime you see something that doesn't look great to you, then you research and like read up the relevant theory around it, and then
Yeah.
try it and look at what other people do too. An example was for me when I first started design, like I was not really good with color, and then it bothered me so much in my designs. I ended up spending like a couple of weeks reading into like very very technical color theory with like channels, RGB, CMYK, hue, saturation, brightness, like different color wheels and stuff. And then I found it really interesting. I enjoyed doing it because it was relevant to the work I was
Yeah. Yeah.
doing. But we had like sign me up for like design 101. It was like chapter 2, and I had to like go through 2 weeks of boring color theory with no application.
Yeah.
Then I feel like I would have given
Yeah,
up.
makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people who will relate with this, because I personally and my circle can relate to this point on so many levels. However, I'm gonna move from the context of knowledge to the context of practicality within an actual employment or an actual job. So as I told you before, and as we discussed already, the scope in which we're discussing this, having the discussion over, which is lesser or immature markets and businesses that aren't giving a lot of margin for their UX designers or product designers to deliver something optimal, let's say. So within a certain circumstances similar to these that I told you, um, how do you think, or if you could project yourself in a similar situation, how do you think a designer can use whatever margin he got, or use the resources he got with the time or resources regardless, in order to build more valuable products, and most importantly, become a more valuable designer while you're working on lesser tasks or non-optimal user experience process or product design process? Uh, if you
Hmm.
can try to project
Yeah,
yourself into that
yeah,
atmosphere.
no, that's a great question. I've actually dealt with this
Mhm.
before as well, although thankfully it's not as common anymore.
Mhm.
Just to clarify, when you say margin, do you mean like you're not getting enough time and
Yes,
resources to actually
exactly. Yeah.
do? Yeah. Gotcha. So usually what happens is your stakeholder, a client, doesn't really understand the value of design.
Yeah.
They see it as like a service or a process that's just like required. A lot of the times they only see the visual and they think that's the only part of design, right?
Yeah.
So there's a concept in a business. There is a profit center and a cost center. A cost center is basically the expenses, right? Like it doesn't actually create any business value, it doesn't generate revenue, but it's just somehow required. And a lot of business owners try and keep cost centers at a minimum.
Mhm.
Profit centers, well, they also try and outsource it as much as possible as
Yeah.
well. Profit centers generate revenue directly, and the business value is very, very clear. No business owner of any sane mind would ever try and mess with the profit centers. They always want to give them as many resources as possible, because anytime they invest $1 worth of time or resource, they get more than $1 back. It's a positive return on investment. So how do you position yourself as a designer in the profit center rather than the cost center? And I think the way to do that is you need to be able to map all your design work and decisions to 4 core metrics, directly or indirectly.
Yeah.
So I mentioned revenue generated,
Mhm.
cost saved, users required, and users retained. Every single design decision or work that you do should somehow map to one of those 4 buckets, and you should figure out how to like track it and build a compelling business case for why you should do it that way. So for example, like if they go like, okay, like 2 weeks to design a website,
Yeah.
right? Like they're still treating you as a cost center. They're like, you are a expense. Here is, X dollars or produce this output, right?
Yeah.
They don't really understand, like, I guess, like the degree of variance and like the output that you can produce, right? So like you want to ask them a question: what is the best possible outcome for this design, right? Like in terms of the hard numbers. And this is a situation where you want to arm yourself with some basic knowledge about the product, the business,
Mhm.
and metrics, KPIs, stats, for
Yeah.
example. So for a website, one of the main, most important things is bounce rate, the percentage of people that leave the site immediately without, doing
Right.
anything, and the conversion rate, the percentage of people that
Actually.
click the main button you want them to click and do the thing that you want to do, right? So you want to explain that to them. Be like, hey, like we could design this really quickly without the proper resources, but the bounce rate would probably be really high. Let's just say it'd be like 80%, conversion rate under 1%. The industry benchmark is 50% bounce rate and 3% conversion rate. Like, what does that mean to your business, right? If
Yes.
you have 100,000 users going to your site every month and your bounce rate is 80%, you only have 20,000 users. Or 20,000 people going to your site. If you reduce that down to 50%, you get like 30,000 more.
Yeah.
Like, is getting $30,000 more users worth an extra week of time? like once you kind of like put it that way, you're speaking in a language that the business person understands. The business person isn't going to understand usability. They're not going to understand layout, typography, visuals, or color. They don't really get it. They can't even really tell the difference between really good design and really bad design, but they will understand the numbers. So it's important for you to like kind of learn the vocabulary so you're speaking the same language.
Yeah, so basically, you should also be able to get yourself a chair within the table of the business decisions and the business discussion that, let's say, goes along with the process of creating a product. Maybe even it's hand in hand with it. So I think, from what I get, it should also the knowledge that the designer should bring to the table should exceed just the technical perspective. It should also reach out to the business and maybe beyond financial perspective of the process, right?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
I would even bring it a step further, and it's like not only do you want to position yourself as part of the profit center, you want to position yourself as a strategic partner.
So,
So what that means is like don't be a task rabbit. Like they shouldn't just be like, here are the requirements. You take the requirements, you design for 8 hours, you give them an output, right? Involve them in the process. Tell them what your goals are. Tell them like different considerations. You can introduce principles, concepts, and frameworks, and then come prepared with something, and then get their involvement,
yeah.
and then work together. And once they can see that you can speak the language, you're brainstorming, and kind of thinking in terms of the business outcome, then they're much more likely to involve you in business decisions, and that's the kind of position you want to get to within your org.
Yeah, makes sense. Probably we're gonna take the same approach, even though I think a lot of what you said maybe applies to the second scenario that I'm gonna talk about right now. But maybe in case you have like a little adjustment to do about the context of a designer, we talked about the designer being in a company circumstance or within a full-time job or an employment. But if we can talk more about the independent designer and how can he brand himself as a problem solver, a bigger scale problem solver rather than just a visual designer, basically, which is a lot of what's happening in our immature markets or in the markets in most countries that aren't so invested into the process, or regions that aren't into so invested into the process. Sorry. Does I think a lot of what you said applies also to the independent, but maybe you have something to add also.
Yeah, great point. So obviously, when you're a freelancer, contractor, an independent designer, you also want to position yourself as somebody that provides business value. So there's two pricing models. Pricing model one is called hourly pricing, meaning you charge X dollars per hour, and however long it takes, however much you earn. This is a very, very bad model because it kind of anchors you into the kind of cost center position, because they're still treating you as a service, right? It's like when you hire like cleaners for your house, like you're paying them like an hourly rate because they're doing a service for you. As a designer, you do not want to be a service provider. You want to be a problem solver, or part of the profit center, or a revenue generator, or actually an investment in the business. So instead, you want to do something called value-based pricing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you should be pricing differently depending on who your client is, what their goals are, and their budget, and how big the company is. Like you should definitely, exercise your right to price discrimination and charge people differently. So what we want to do is we want to figure out the dollar cost, like projected estimated ballpark of their prom, and then you want to look at what their current numbers are, right?
Yeah.
And then see how far they are away from benchmark. And if you can get them to benchmark, how much more money do you bring into the business? And then you want to charge them, I usually charge 10 to 30% of that upside. And just throw some random numbers at you. Let's say somebody asks you to redesign their landing page. It takes you 10 hours. Even if you charge, $100 an hour, that's only $1,000. It's not a lot.
Yeah.
But if somebody asks you to redesign their landing page, you ask them, why are you redesigning the landing page? Like, what is it about the current landing page that, isn't working? If they say things like, oh, like, it's not pretty, or like it doesn't look good, or it's off brand, like those aren't real reasons, right? Like what is the business reason? Like, why are you willing to invest money to redesign this website? So to do that, you want to get a sense, right? Like, again, let's say 100,000 people go into the website and they're like, oh, like, people are just leaving, they're not doing anything, right? How much is one kind of conversion worth to you, right? If it's like $100 per user, you do the math, be like, and then you find out like your bounce rate again is like, that's a conversion rate, it's like 1%. And then the mark is 3%. If you increase by 2%, you're 3xing their revenue, right? If the revenue is like $100,000, 3x, $300,000, take 10%, that's 30K,
Easy.
right? Compared to 1K.
Yep.
And you're probably spending the same amount of time, but you're just positioning yourself differently. Like, ask any business owner, if they gave you $1,000 and you gave them $1,000 and $1 back, how many times will they make that deal? Infinite number of times, right? You're not even asking for 99% margin.
Of course.
You're asking for a 10% margin. If they gave you $100 and you gave them $1,000 back, how many times will they do it? An infinite number of times, right? But like, if you ask them to give you $100 for a service, they'll try and haggle you. But $100 is a lot. What is this? What are you going to give me? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the analogy is perfect. Actually, it's so visual. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. In fact, it changed my perspective to a certain extent about this topic specifically. Yeah, so interesting, so interesting. Have you been put in a situation where you weren't able to actually solve a specific problem? Because right now, for me, the fact that you are willing to basically enter into a I wouldn't say partnership, but your revenue is so bound to what you deliver as value to a certain, let's say, a website or a website that you are trying to rebrand, or a landing page that you're redoing, that just for example, and your revenue is bound to the percentage that you will bring as outcome of your work. Have you ever put in a situation or had that backfire on you and something didn't go as well, and you basically would have been better off actually taking, let's say, a solid figure or a static figure instead of going for the percentage? I feel like the percentage is something, even though I understand the context of the percentage, but just to let's say digest it a bit or decompose it a bit for the viewers, it's
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I have an answer for that. So, short answer, no, it's never happened because I have a special approach. So, typically, I will only make this deal and I only accept clients where I feel like there's a big deviation from the baseline, which means like for every industry, you want to know what the average is, right? If the average is 50% bounce rate and the current bounce rate's like 48%, then you're like, all right, there's not a lot of value. I can confidently deliver there. So you turn it down. In my case, like I actually turn down 80% of the work because if I'm not confident I can provide significant business value, I won't do it. Because like I don't want to just like design something just to design something. I want to know that for work, like yeah, for work, even if it's like 2%, then I have an approach, which means like I do A/B testing. So like I never guarantee that I'm going to get it right in one shot. It might take 3, 4, 5, or even 6 tries. But every time I do an experiment, I'm like closer to I'm much closer to narrowing down the optimal solution. So a couple things is like just to clarify also, you don't want to promise like X%. You want to do the math in your head and then use it to defend your positioning. So don't say like, oh, I'll take 10%. Just be like, I potentially will create X dollars of value for you. And I want to charge 30K, and they're like 30K is a lot, and then you kind of explain it the way I did, like talk about it as like a positive investment, etc. Really, my policy is that if they ask for a guarantee, I can give it to them, but then I double the price. So then I charge 60K instead of 30K. And to guarantee that, what I do is like I'll outsource parts of the design that I'm not confident in. I'll find the best SEO person, the best content writer, and then I do the relationship management and like the sourcing. But as a result, I still make a big margin for doing that management. Um, so you can guarantee it, just double the price and be really ambitious here, because usually it's going to take you more than a couple tries. Like as you get more experience, you might get in the first or second try, but like you have to factor in the time it'll take you to arrive at like that optimal solution. Because if you're getting paid hourly, you can work on it for as long as the client doesn't fire you. But if you promise like a result, like a minimum result, give yourself some padding
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Even if the bench
So,
is fifty
mm,
percent, don't say you'll get 50%. Say like you'll get like a 10% increase or
yeah,
something like that. If you get 30 or whatever, and then always under promise and over deliver. You can even structure in like a bonus incentive, or if you exceed that for 10% goal, then you can add the percentages back in. Um, but yeah, like just do A/B testing, check deviation, benchmark, double it if they want to guarantee, and outsource the parts that you're not confident in. And yeah, I think that's about it. That's like my general
yeah.
approach.
Um,
But you can play around and see what works
yeah,
for you.
perfect. If I sum it up a bit, I think there's like two main factors. One of them is your how you see that business, or the margin of profit within that specific business, or working with a specific business. And the second factor is your confidence that you can actually bring value to that, or work on an effective solution for that business. So these are the two main factors for your in your thought process, right? Okay.
Yep.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so we're gonna backpedal a bit to something more technical, which is your tools of preference. I mean, you probably dealt with a lot of deliverables on a lot of different projects and different companies, and yeah, every discipline, like you mentioned, it's basically a different skill set and different maybe tool set. But if we can like take your tools of preference within specific jobs, let's say, or overall tools of preference. That's for one, and for two, even though it's a topic that I highly, highly hate talking about, which is um, the prototyping tools wars and the debate that's going on right now. For me personally, I feel like it's a useless debate. The fact that you just work on the tool that delivers the most value for what you're trying to deliver. Some tools give better value in prototyping, others give better value for structure, for design systems, for collaborations, for fidelity, whatever. So for me, it's a useless tool. But I don't know. Maybe you have a different take on that. You do a useless debate, sorry, but maybe you have a different take on that, and yeah, and also your tools of preference. Maybe someone will be inspired or to have a confirmation that a Facebook designer is working on his favorite tool. So yeah,
Okay. Can't talk about Facebook tools specifically, but I'll talk more
okay,
generally. And I
okay,
think you're exactly right.
mm-hmm.
Um, there's no point like debating on tools, because one, it's a matter of preference, and tools become outdated so
Mm-hmm.
quickly that I wouldn't waste time trying to master a tool. Just learn how to adapt and understand the different models of
Mm-hmm.
tools, because once you do that in the future, you'll be able to pick up new tools easily, right? Like whatever's popular now might not be popular in a few years.
Sure.
For example, 5 years ago it was Photoshop and Illustrator, and then 2 or 3 years ago it was
Yeah.
Sketch, and now it's Figma and XD. And then who knows, 5 years in the future it could be a completely different
Yeah.
tool. But there's certain concepts and models are always
Mm-hmm.
consistent, right? Like the concept of an artboard, the concept of an inspector panel, the concept of the pen tool. That's pretty universal, and I don't think that'll change as frequently. So focus on understanding like the systems, the models behind the tools, and learn how to be adaptable. Like for me, like I use probably like 20, 30 tools, and it just depends on whatever I need to do. But I also learn all the tools really quickly and easily too, because I focused on kind of the transferable aspects. Just like very high level, like I primarily use like Figma for design and prototyping. If I need something more advanced, I might use like origami or Framer or Protopie. or Webflow. User research, I like to use Dscout, um, SurveyMonkey, Qualaroo, Typeform, Optimal Workshop, Usability Hub. I feel like I'm just like naming tools
No,
right now because I
it's all
use.
good. It's all good. I'm pretty sure it would be useful for someone, especially I'm for one. There is a couple of tools that I actually didn't recognize. So for me already, there is some fresh names in there. But yeah, for sure, for sure. I think I agree with you when it comes to the approach of learning tools. I think it's the flexibility is something mandatory for a designer, especially as the problems change, also the solutions gonna change. So you can't keep working on the same tool to produce the same type of solution. Well, a tool can produce several types, but at a certain point you may not be able to deliver a solution based on what that tool is offering. So you need to make the migration into something that's more adapted to the kind of problems you're trying to solve. So I think I agree with you completely when it comes to how to tackle this entire debate, which I find really superficial, but some people really into these wars, and I don't know why, but yeah, whatever. So yeah, right now, if we can go back a bit about you and about if you look back at like different choices, different decisions you took throughout your career, and if you go back to the very start of your career as a user experience designer, if you can choose like 2 to 3 tips you could give yourself, like the most important tips you could give to yourself as a starting designer, what those tips could look like, or what would they be?
Okay, great. So the first tip would be to, never force yourself to learn something because you think you'll need it. Only learn things that are either immediately relevant to the work you're doing or you have a natural curiosity towards. And a subset of that is like always go for projects that you're curious about. Don't worry about impact, don't worry about money. At least early on in your career, like the projects you're interested and passionate about will give you the greatest learning opportunities. Even if there's some better opportunity on paper, like it's not going to be better for you because if you find it just interesting, you're not going to put in the effort. You want design or the process of learning design to be more like play and less like work, which is the first piece. Because when I first started, like I kind of made a list of design concepts and principles that I thought I needed to know or understand, and I would force myself to go through them. And I've forgotten like most of them now, but like if I had just like done a different approach and just like only learned what I was curious about and what was relevant to the work I was doing, I feel like I would have retained it. And that's what I do now, and it's been working so much better. So that's like the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice is when you're going for job opportunities, always go for the opportunity that gives you the most options on the road because you want to expand your degrees of freedom when it comes to choice. And on that note, you always want to negotiate as well. Always negotiate an offer no matter what. Although I don't know culturally if it's like more or less accepted over there,
More.
but at least in North
It's
America,
probably more.
always
Uh,
always negotiate. I know in Asia or in Japan,
mhm.
if you negotiate, they can take away your offer. But in North America, you always want to negotiate because they always lowball you at the
Yeah.
start. Um, the last piece of advice I have is let me think. Looks like this is a good one. Um, oh yes, work on your communication skills really, really early as soon as possible. Like design is like whether or not design is a technical field is like up for debate, but the technical side of design is actually much easier than you guys think it is. It's not that hard nowadays with like how minimal most interfaces are and how good the tools are. There's a lot of people that'll spend years and years and years working on visual design skills when that's only a very small piece
Mhm.
of what a designer does. I'd say like 80 to 90% if you're to become more senior is going to be fully so focused on communication.
Mhm.
So that includes like written and verbal. So start practicing it as early as you can because I think that's going to carry you the furthest.
Mhm. Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, sounds like tips that not only a young you can use, but maybe even an old me or a medium someone else can actually use. So again, thanks for sharing these, and thanks for the insightful information. I would love to know more also about your social presence, and where maybe someone can follow your work or for more about the content, the valuable content that I personally seen, and I would love everyone to also check out, and I'm sure they will find great value in. So if someone wanna follow Richard Young and see his content, where can he follow him exactly?
Cool. Yeah. So I have a newsletter that I started this year that I've been trying to write weekly or bi-weekly
Mhm.
for. It's called The Ambitious Designer. The website is
Okay, I will
ambitiousddesigner.com.
link it
So most
somewhere.
yeah, most of my writing will be
Mhm.
there, but for like all my links, and like I'm on Medium, LinkedIn, Instagram. I also have like a private Facebook mentoring group that I run, and I do like weekly sessions, and post like a lot of like writing and resources there and answer questions. You can find all these links on my Instagram in the bio. My handle's at richard.ux. So you'll find everything there, including the Substack.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so it's been a really rich session. Thank you so much for your time. This is way beyond the fact that we're having this exchange. For me, I'm happy just the fact that I could just dialogue with you, because I've been following your great work for so long. So this is a pure pleasure for me, and hopefully we can see more of your work, and maybe you can see a lot of mine in the future. And hopefully we can also, as a community here in North Africa and Tunisia, we can also see more of your content reaching out regions and markets that usually don't receive content as refined as yours. And yeah, if you have any final words you want to say about the topic in general, or any well, more tips, I guess, feel free to say so. And yeah, the mic is yours.
Yeah, yeah. No, thank you. I really
All
appreciate it. I
right.
had a fantastic time.
Hmm.
Great host. Happy to keep in touch if there's more community
For sure,
stuff.
for sure, for sure,
Like, if you hear any more topics, I'm happy to chat again.
for sure.
Um, yeah, I guess like the last part of it is just like design is such a broad field. You can literally do like anything, and like no two designers are the same in their skill set and the work they do. So don't be afraid to spend some time exploring and kind of develop and carve out that niche, that specialty that you are actually interested in. You're naturally kind of like talented and gifted in, because there has to be something with a field so broad. Like, don't force yourself to learn skills or things or go through courses or books that feel required, or that other people are doing, because it's not going to be for you. And like, if everyone's doing it, then it doesn't make you unique anymore. It's especially good if you can like find areas that aren't very well explored. Maybe you can come up with a new field or intersect something that you already know with the field of design and create a lot of value there. At the end of the day, always focus on how do you map the user value to the business value and act as that bridge, because that's what's going to make you really successful.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank
yeah, no,
thank you so
awesome.
much. Again, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening, and I hope to hear more from you soon.
Sounds good. Take care.
All right.